Assemblyman Lackey was first elected in 2000. Thank you. Was first elected in the State Assembly in 2014, representing 36 Assembly District, which encompassed portions of Kern County, Los Angeles County, and San Bernardino. He is the Vice Chair of the Assembly Committee of Public Safety and was appointed to CCDA in 2016. Commissioner Lackey has been a leader on providing strong public safety policies and has been an advocate for affordable taxes, educational improvement, and job growth through private sector economic development. Commissioner Lackey has been a champion to combat the growing problems of drug driving and state funding to support programs for individuals with developmental disabilities. Before joining the Assembly, he was a special education teacher and served 28 years in the California Highway Patrol. And I will say I'm so proud that quickly after becoming a commissioner for CCDA, he partnered with CCDA and had a capital briefing with the chiefs of staff. And this was a tremendous support for us and was very fruitful that we were able to develop a lot of relationships because of what you did for us. So we thank you and we look forward to that partnership and continued partnership. So let's start giving some hand claps and welcome. and this gentleman we met just recently, and he is our newest commissioner, Assemblyman Jim Frazier. He was just within a month appointed to the board, but he actually was elected in 2012 to represent Assembly District 11, which encompasses Solano, Contra Costa, and Sacramento counties. This gentleman is a longtime advocate for the disability community. It is reflective in his work with East Contra Costa County First All Abilities Playground, co-sponsorship of the Cast for Kids Fishing Derby, his support with the establishment of Antioch Special Haven Multi-Sensor Room, which helps individuals with autism, brain injury, developmental disabilities, dementia, and PTSD. And he was awarded also for his service in Northern California for the Special Olympics. As I mentioned, I just met our newest commissioner, and I told him in his office, I thought I went to the lottery when I met. So I was like, we just won something here for sure. So again, let's welcome our newest commissioner, Commissioner Assemblyman Jim Frazier. And before I introduce our last representative, legislative representative, I'd like to share with you all that both Assemblymen Jim Cooley and Timothy Grayson had wished to be here. They wanted to be a part of this today, but had conflicting or impeding commitments that would made them unable to be here. But I did want to give recognition to them because they showed a strong interest in working with CCDA. Last but not least on this presentation is a representative from Senator Pan's office today, and that is Deputy District Director Joe Dibbs. And Deputy Dibbs has been a community servant for 40 plus years. He had said more, but I said, you know, we don't want to age you too much in that description. But he has worked with various legislative leaders prior to joining Senator Pan's office 3 years ago, such as U.S. Representative Maxine Waters. With that said, he has worked nationally as well as locally as a public servant. Locally, he has chaired for several years for the County Planning Commission in Oak Park. Deputy Director Dibbs has served as an advocate for the low-income and the underserved population of our community and has reached out to CCDA to begin opportunities to develop educational outreach efforts on behalf of Senator Pan's office. We at this time would also like to acknowledge all the legislative staffing that's in the room as well. So if those who are here, raise your hand, give us a yes. Thank you. And there are those who are also probably listening on the phone, but we just want to truly acknowledge all those who are participating and want to give appropriate introduction as best we could at this time. So with that said, I just want to, again, thank you all for coming, thank the staff for putting this together, all those who have been working and still on their job right now. And now I'd like to, without further ado, introduce and present to you all our facilitator for this coffee chat, and that is Eileen. Yes, yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Good evening. Good to see you all. I'm going to scoot around here. So we wanted to start the conversation first by inviting our commissioners to share a little bit about what they heard today. We had many participants in the room this afternoon in conversation about the disability parking programs. So we wanted to have them share a little bit of what we heard, and then we want to hear from you. So Commissioner McGinnis, you want to go? Help us out here?
Gentlemen, I've been asked to summarize what we heard today. Before I attempt to do that, and I hope I do it justice, I wanted to just let you know who is in the room and who is on the phone who we heard from today. There were nonprofit organizations, there were government entities represented, both municipalities and parking organizations, there were business interests who were represented, and there were also individuals who came because parking issues affect their daily lives. People with disabilities, parents of children with disabilities. I was really pleased at what a broad cross-section of constituents came and shared their opinions and their thoughts with us. And so I feel a real responsibility that I'm trying to summarize what they said to you and convey to you their thoughts. And so I hope that my fellow commissioners will help me out if I leave out something that's important. We had a panel that was comprised of people from the City of Sacramento Parking Division, people from the DMV, and a representative of the Center for Independent Living Facilities. And they talked about various aspects of disabled parking programs, and the DMV representatives were really the most interesting to the people in the room and on the phone, because the DMV talked about how the fact that it had been audited, its parking placard program had been audited, and how much fun that was for them, and how much they learned as a result. And your tax dollars at work, it turned out to be a very productive audit for them. They learned what had not been going right, and it sounded as if they have made a lot of very productive changes, which the people who were listening very much appreciated. After we had that panel speak, we broke into small groups, and every person in the room and every person on the phone had the opportunity to go to each of the focus groups and give their opinion on 3 topics. The 3 topics included a discussion of parking access itself, a discussion of the DMV parking placard program and its management, and a discussion of innovation. What kind of changes would folks like to see? So I am going to touch on each one of those 3 topics and try and summarize what the responses were. People were asked what did they like, what was working, and what would they like to see change. So in terms of parking access itself, I think universally everyone was thrilled to see that DMV and affiliated law enforcement was doing more enforcement against placard abuse. That was one of the things that came out of the audit. The DMV was committed to doing more of it. And everybody was thrilled to do that, because people who legitimately have placards really have difficulty finding parking, and people who don't want to see people parking and so they can't get a meter themselves. So one of the things that came out was that people would like to actually see more opportunity for disabled parking, more scoping, expansion of the number of disabled designated parking spots, because as I'm sure you're aware, as our population ages, more and more people fall into the category of mobility disability, and it's harder and harder to find disability parking spots. They also saw that there's a problem with what under Title III would be called public accommodations, that is, private businesses not having the number of disabled parking spots they're supposed to have, and when they do have them, not enforcing them. So one of the things that folks asked is if the DMV and law enforcement would both educate these private businesses and would assist with enforcement of disabled parking laws on private property. There also came up, and these were representative government agencies who said this, they shall remain nameless, that there is a problem with government agencies not having sufficient disabled parking spaces at government buildings, and that this was a system-wide problem. And finally, folks said that there was a problem with street parking, that cities either not providing sufficient street parking for people with disabilities or doing something like placing it in the middle of the block or not providing curb cuts so that when a person with a disability does park, they have to travel in the street, and they're at risk of course, being hit by a car while they're trying to find a way up onto the curb. So while there was a lot of praise for the good work the DMV is doing, there was a lot of room for improvement. On the question of management of the placard program again, itself, we did have one person who commented that he had just had his permanent placard renewed under the new process, which is interrogating applications more strictly. And he said that it went very smoothly, and he very much appreciated it. So again, good government at work. There were a lot of questions about what doctors do and how much of a judgment call they have when they go about approving a placard for a person, deciding whether they have a disability and whether they have a need for a placard. The person at the DMV said there's a little bit of pushback from organizations that represent doctors not wanting to be involved with policing and enforcing their members. And so the DMV wasn't sure whether it was going to be able to work with organizations of doctors to work on enforcement from that end. But the people who were on the phone and the people who were in the audience certainly wanted doctors at least to be educated about what comprises a disability and about the problems of abuse of placards by doctors, the problems of doctors not sufficiently asking questions before issuing a placard. They also noted that sometimes caregivers and IHSS workers will take the placard of a person who legitimately deserves one and use it when the disabled person is not in the car. So they identified that as another way that disabled placards can sometimes be misused. And then on the third topic of innovation, there was actually quite a bit of discussion. One issue that came up, there was discussion on sort of both sides of the issue, is integrating RFID or photos into placards, or putting little disabled ISA wheelchairs onto the driver's licenses of people who have disabled placards. And of course, on the other side of that are issues of privacy, because although you need a placard, you don't necessarily want to show everybody that you're a person with a disability every time you produce your driver's license. So there was a tension between trying to find ways of ensuring that only people who legitimately possess a placard are using it, and also trying to maintain the privacy of people who do have placards. There was a lot of discussion of trying to educate both the public and placard users. One of the suggestions that came up was improving public awareness. I know the DMV is doing public service announcements, and they're trying to educate people about saving the space for people who legitimately need a disabled parking spot. But there's also discussion about making people aware of the difference between a disabled spot and a van-accessible disabled spot, so that if you have a placard and you don't need the van-accessible spot, you just use the regular spot. And so people asked if the DMV would actually produce educational materials for people who have placards, that when they receive their placard, they also receive education about the responsible way to use their placard, and not allowing people who are friends or family to use their placard, and how they can use their placard properly. There was also suggestion that people who can't find metered parking be allowed to park in garages. There was a discussion about programs in other states. Apparently Illinois and the city of Portland have a two-tiered parking system where people with mobility disabilities are allowed to park in metered spaces, but they pay. They're allowed to park longer, but they still pay. And people who also have agility problems in their upper limbs don't have to pay at all because they can't manipulate the issues with the meters. I think that was an attempt to respond to this person from the city of Sacramento who was talking about the need for municipal funding to come out of parking spaces. I hope that I have covered everything. If I haven't, I'm sure someone will educate the legislature. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. That was an amazing summary of a lot of conversation, so thank you very much. And I know you all have to leave pretty soon, so I want to make sure you have time. We'll start with you, Assemblyman Frazier. You can either react to what you heard and talk a little bit about what you're doing in the legislature around this.
So there have been, I'm the chairman of the Transportation Committee in California for the Assembly, and so there has been legislation that's been in my committee that has started to address these issues with the placards. Not only accessibility, but also forgery of the placards and whatnot, and the misuse, and the physicians also and how they administer them. So I think it's an ongoing process. The Hill bill was brought into stature, I believe, and the Gatto bill was held in committee, but I think one of the things that we have to look at when we introduce legislation on these matters is to be very segmented and take steps to a plan for success instead of trying to throw a bunch of items at the wall and see what sticks. Pick the positions or pick the accessibility or pick the time slots and make a plan to get to it. But if you try to do all at one time in one bill, you have too many factions that might be against something. And so I think it has to be a methodical approach on going forward. We've talked to business, we've talked to, in my office, we've talked to the advocates who have the placards. So I think it's just an ongoing thing to work towards a process that has a balance for everybody. And then also, local government has to be part of the process when they look at the planning process of future development, but also in hindsight, how they might be helpful in accomplishing for private development who already is established, how we can help them achieve accessibility also. So it's a multi-pronged approach, and there just needs a very, very prescriptive plan to get to, the objective.
Yeah, the good news is I believe that our society and our government is engaged in disability awareness improvement. If you look back just a short distance ago, things are much, much worse. And so progress is incremental when it comes with government and public policy. And being a person that has, my father suffered a severe stroke for the last 12 years of his life. And so I understand very clearly the challenges associated with mobility challenges. And so we've come a long way. We have a long way to go. And I think part of the what was said by my colleague, Assemblymember Frazier, and working with local governments is a very powerful piece of trying to bringing real solutions. We can pass all the laws we want up here, but unless they're implemented and they're enforced, they mean very little. And so it's really, really important that we get the cooperative effort and to try to communicate in a very genuine manner, not to be pounding on the desk until it actually comes to that, but to try to work in a cooperative spirit and to let people know the genuine demand for some of these changes that need to take place. And I think that we can get to where we need to get, but it's going to take the genuine efforts of this group who need to advocate, because it won't just happen on its own. It has to be pushed, and you have to advocate. But the way you advocate is as important as your advocacy. So let's work cooperatively, and let's work smartly. And I think that we have a lot of good things to look forward to for our mobility disabled folks.
I forgot to tell Angela, I was a caregiver for 10 years. And during that period of time, I learned a lot of things as relates to people not being able to access. I learned that one time I was on crutches. And when I went into the bathroom, I couldn't reach things, right? And I couldn't get in and outdoors. And I was saying, how do people maneuver in and out of these private buildings when you don't have adequate access, or trying to make your way in and out of the bathroom, which came so natural to me. But after I was on crutches, it was like, dang, you know, we have a real problem. Let me also say, too, Senator Richard Pan is a doctor. He's a pediatrician. So a lot of times people think that legislators kind of stay in their own lane when it comes to a specific subject, but that is not true. They all have various interests. They come in and out, and they have various interests, especially when it comes to the public, because all of their districts have some of the same problems, and that's people. And so it's good to see legislators who have the various interests and who sit on the various committees. Today, I heard some things which enlightened me. I was really happy because this listening tour was an educational thing for me. And many of the things that people talked about really don't need legislation. It just needs enforcement. You mentioned it. All it needs is enforcement. We need to shore up the laws we have already on the books, and we need to start paying attention to them and then start enforcing them. Yes, some of the other innovative things we talked about, they're a little draconian. They might take legislation because they're dealing with some constitutional issues. But I think, for the most part, I think if we all work together, because there was a diverse group of people that was in that room today, and I think if we all left out of there with something educational, and if we all had a mission and a charge, I think we could get a lot of things done.
Thank you very much. So in a moment, I'm going to invite the commissioners to ask questions of the panelists, but I do have a follow-up. Assemblyman Frazier, you kind of implied that all of this is about striking a balance, right? Business needs, the disability community needs, local government. So how do you strike a balance between access, accountability, and enforcement in the disability parking program? How do you do that?
Well, it's kind of like what you started this morning. You have to have the players in the room. You have to have everybody talking about what is important to them, okay? And be very prescriptive. And then I'm a general contractor by trade. So, you know, I've been in the construction industry for 35 years. I use the subcontractor model where all of my experts, my subcontractors, helped me build my houses, okay? And so we would need the experts in the field and the advocates to share, and then you construct a plan. And you know, sometimes it takes compromise also. It's not always is everybody going to come out happy, but there might be a plan, you know, that comes to some kind of solution and going forward. And it doesn't mean it has to be cast in stone. You can adapt from that point too, but at least you get a starting point, and it can be a living document that you work on from going forward. But again, you have to look at what, when we talk about enforcement, a lot of the cities now are understaffed because of their public safety is underfunded, you know, due to constraints. And so what do they cut first? They cut parking enforcement. You know, they look at priorities. And so, you know, you've got to, you know, be supportive of city councils that are going forward and making this, your voice count in that solution also is that they gear up towards that possibility. So, you know, and just make sure that you're never giving up. I mean, you're always striving for more.
Probably the good old days when you're the general contractor and you could just be the boss. Now you have to actually collaborate and stuff, huh?
It's part of the process.
Yeah, there's no general contractors in the assembly. Right? There would, Assemblyman Lackey, would you like to respond?
Just,
It should be working.
yeah, I would just validate the point that communication is very powerful. And that's really, in my experience in being in local government, that engagement and honest dialogue is where you actually begin to make progress that's meaningful. And I think that it has to, when we have the idea in the minds of those who are state legislators that the one-size-fits-all circumstance, because it's a little bit simpler, it really usually misses the mark. And so really what's important is that we collaborate with the local governments because they're the ones that implement the policy. And so those are the ones that we need to communicate honestly, and we need to seek their input and not just think that we're all-knowing just because we have a little more power. Sometimes that can be a curse as well as a blessing. So we just need to be aware of all the moving parts that make a good public policy workable. And I think that once we are able to openly communicate some of the challenges, the real practical challenges associated with the common goal, because sometimes there's some disconnections that you have to work through. And in fact, is almost every one of the public policies that I know of that deal with access and these kinds of circumstances, there's some disagreement. And so you have to work for the common good and to try to do the compromise that's going to have a meaningful outcome and improve the situation. And sometimes incremental improvement is what you have to be satisfied with in the onset. And then they'll see the benefit and the workability, and then you can keep moving.
Thank you. Mr. Debs, you want to comment on balance, striking a balance?
Well, someone said it.
Will you use the mic, please? Thanks.
My wife said I talk loud enough, but I guess I. Someone said it, and that is you have to start at the local level because that's where a lot of the policy as it relates to what we're talking about. And so you have the buy-in from all the players. You can't, one thing I like about your organization, Ms. Jamaat, is that you guys are not adversarial. I notice you have a good balance of individuals who all agree on the same mission. That's hard to do, okay? And so when I noticed that and I saw that at the first meeting that I attended, that was one of the things I said to Senator Pan, that many of the people that's on your board, they're all going in the same direction. You had developers, you had engineers, you had all of these people who all agreed. And I thought that was a miracle. I thought that was great. I don't know if they were drugged or not, but whatever you guys take, you keep doing it because that's what it's going to take. People all going in the same direction, regardless of what level you're at. If you can all agree on the mission, and then I think success will come.
Thanks. Any questions or comments from the commissioners? Oh,
You know, as I'm listening, and forgive me for sounding like a frog, we have talked about this, and today we're really talking about it in depth because with the diversity, as you said, in this room, we all have different opinions. So one of the things I'd like to bring up would be a recommendation possibly from you as legislators, from you who work with policy development. Why we need a way of getting the media and private industry involved in getting the information out. In my experience of training and consulting, I find that there's a real wide, broad definition and sometimes a misperception of what disability is and what it entails as a person. And I think that we see a lot of media presentations, you know, they're popular, but they do not really get to the crux of the matter. It feels to me, as I watch that or see it, or hear it, I find that I'd like to know what your perceptions might be in getting the media and private industry both to get the word out. We are a visual culture. The United States, America is. In fact, most of the Western countries are visual. And unless you keep showing them, saying it over and over again, it doesn't move as quickly as we need it to. And I would like very much to hear from you in that, about that kind of thing.
So you are right, we are a very visual culture. One of the things that I would think that would be an asset is to work with every chamber of commerce going forward and making sure the chambers are able to convey the message to the private business owners in collaboration with maybe the police departments in the jurisdictions. Social media is another really good aspect of how a lot of our millennials learn. But also, we have the capacity in the legislature to do PSAs and for TV and also radio. And, you know, I've done them for different facets of distracted driving and whatnot and going forward. And, you know, I can't speak for Assemblymember Lackey, but I'd be more than happy to start that process, you know, as far as with recommendations from the commissioners in this body on how I can better, you know, send that message of going forward. And I think if there was a mission statement that was developed or already is here with the commission, I think we could put something together that was pretty cool. Absolutely. You know, and you know, love to champion it with you. But you know, social media, Chamber of Commerce's, and then also, you know, we have message boarding on our highways through Caltrans, and you know, just mindful things that, you know, kind of reminds you of things that you need to do, be more thoughtful.
This is something that's a task of legislators, private industry, and the community at large. And that's just why I'm asking what you think with, what would you think about really working up something with the media and the various outlets that we have access to.
Media as a whole is, they're monetary driven, and so they're about ads. And so, I mean, I don't want to ask them to do a whole lot because they're there to make money, and I mean, we need to be able to move the message ourselves through social media. And I think that if we were able to demonstrate progress, then the media would be able to start following it. But, you know, I think that the biggest movement is to be able to get the message to the businesses that need to be understanding of what the constraints are. The Chamber of Commerce are the best, you know, business districts are the best access to that too.
I think you've really hit on something very powerful, though, that, you know, education is part of our culture, and there's no better way to educate or quicker way to educate than through visual communication. And I do believe that there are champions for this issue that we can call upon to try to help us to communicate with the public. As Assemblymember Frazier said, you know, public service announcements come at no cost. And we need to be champions for this particular partnership with the media and let them know that we need their help on first defining what a disability is. Something that simple can be a big impediment to progress. And so those are very astute observations on your part of things that we need to do to be more impactful, and we can actually be pretty impactful pretty quickly if we do it effectively. So I think you're onto something.
Commissioner Betty, you are absolutely right. I'm from the hood, and what we are, and I'm an advocate, and you have to have something that's worth media attention, okay? So in order to get the media, you got to have a gimmick, okay? You really do. You got to have something that's going to attract attention. And yes, PSAs are fine too as well, because that's the educational part that reaches a lot of people. But this group with well, you're almost a grassroots group, okay? And even though you come from the bureaucrat side, but your membership suggests that you're grassroots. Having grassroots people, okay, is where you take it. You take it to the streets. And all you have to do is come up with a good media, something that attracts attention, because the media loves events. They love things that's different, okay? I mean, there's so many things. So if you sit down and just put your heads together and come up with a good media idea, you'll be surprised. You can even get them to come out on a Saturday and a Sunday if it's good enough, okay? But the point is, you got to have a good media something to attract attention, because along with that education, okay, again, that's what the media likes, educating people and making noise. So you got to come up with something which will let people know what your goal is and what direction you're headed in. They'll come.
Thank you very much for your wisdom on that from the ground. The good news is we started a really rich dialogue. The bad news is we've got to cut it off here because our panelists have to leave. So maybe perhaps we can invite you back for another conversation. And well, I want to let you go. I do want to thank you, and I want to let the folks who are listening that this will be the recording, and the recording from this afternoon will be posted on the CCDA website, and there'll be follow-up communications about this. And I think we have one more.
I just want to say one thing
Sure. Before you let them go,
I'm just going to take 2 seconds. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I just want to follow up on one thing. Sorry. Yep. Mr. Debs said, I want to follow up. The reason that CCDA is all pulling in the same direction is that we recognize that ultimately disability rights is a civil right. It is not merely a balancing of of interests, but it is a civil right on a par with gender rights and with racial rights. And so everybody on this commission recognizes that. And so we appreciate the fact that you also recognize that, and that you're going to work to support those rights in the process of working as legislators. And we thank you for your support.
I don't think there's a better way to end this conversation than on that note. Thank you very much for being here. Take care.